A royal property, once veiled in ancestral silence, has suddenly re-emerged, and the heir. Not a senior royal, not a seasoned duke, but young Prince Louis. In a single stroke, a historic inheritance bypasses Camilla's bloodline entirely, lighting a firestorm across palace walls and private estates. Now, insiders say, this isn't just a gift, it's a declaration of war. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It began as nothing more than a quiet ripple, a discreet shift in estate records tucked away in the Welsh countryside. But when that ripple reached the royal palace, it became an earthquake. An estate once under the quiet guardianship of the late Queen Mother, hidden away from the glare of the public, and even certain branches of the family, was revealed to have a new heir. And it wasn't Charles. It wasn't Anne. It wasn't even Prince George, the expected heir to everything. It was Prince Louis, the youngest, the one often dismissed as too young to be part of any meaningful royal conversation. That narrative has now been shattered in the most unthinkable way. The reassignment came from a sealed personal deed, a private declaration made by the Queen Mother herself long before her passing. In that document, she named Louis not just as the recipient, but as the protector of the land. A symbolic role, yes, but also a deeply pointed one. The Queen Mother had always been a defender of tradition, of continuity, of bloodline, and this, it seems, was her final safeguard. But the fallout from this decision wasn't just about property. It exposed the fragile and increasingly hostile fracture within the royal household. Behind the scenes, tension between the Wales household and Camilla's expanding family had been simmering. This inheritance brought it to a boil. Camilla's relatives, particularly her children and grandchildren, were reportedly blindsided. For years, they had moved ever closer to the inner circle, granted access, influence, and quiet promises. Some expected symbolic gestures, others hoped for real recognition, but none expected to be completely sidelined. According to insiders, one of Camilla's grandchildren had even visited the estate in recent years under the impression that it would be kept in the family. That assumption was dismantled overnight. Leaked palace briefings suggest that King Charles was not immediately in favor of the move. It allegedly took months of persuasion, some say by Princess Catherine herself, to get his reluctant signature on the inheritance confirmation. But when he finally signed, it was clear. This wasn't just about fulfilling a dead woman's wish. It was a power play. A move to set the future of the monarchy in stone. A message to the public, to the press, and above all to Camilla's family. The backlash was immediate and ferocious. Camilla's inner circle saw the inheritance not only as an insult, but as a public humiliation. Rumors of secret meetings, heated phone calls, and behind-the-scenes lobbying began swirling around the palace like wildfire. For the Queen Consort's relatives, it wasn't just about land, it was about legacy, about being acknowledged as part of the royal machine. That door, it now seems, has been slammed shut. But to understand why this move cuts so deep, we must dig into a legacy the monarchy has long tried to bury, one rooted in secrets, shadows, and the Queen Mother's final vow. Few documents within the royal vaults carry the weight or the secrecy of the Queen Mother's private will. Hidden for decades, its contents were whispered about but never confirmed. Now, a mysterious clause has surfaced, pointing not just to Prince Louis, but to a vision of the monarchy that excludes Camilla's bloodline entirely. It began with a quiet audit, a routine archival sweep at Clarence House that was meant to catalogue insignificant family records, receipts, travel documents, and old correspondences. But tucked deep within a locked drawer, behind layers of aging velvet and brittle parchment, was a sealed envelope marked in the Queen Mother's own delicate hand. Inside, a handwritten codicil, short, precise, but explosive. The document explicitly named Prince Louis as custodian of the Welsh heritage, a phrase rich in symbolism, layered with history, and sharpened by exclusion. This wasn't just about bequeathing a property. This was about appointing a guardian of legacy. And in doing so, the Queen Mother made something crystal clear. Some bloodlines, in her eyes, carried the soul of the monarchy. Others did not. Her language was unmistakable. She referenced Wales not as a location but as a living heart of the kingdom, and Louis as the vessel through which its spirit may endure. Nowhere in the clause was there any room for compromise. Camilla's relatives, whether by marriage, proximity, or assumed privilege, were not acknowledged, not even once. The silence was deafening. And to those familiar with the Queen Mother's convictions, it wasn't surprising. Historians have long hinted at her distaste for remarried consorts. Her belief in bloodline purity wasn't just an old-fashioned stance, it was a defining principle. And in this case, that principle manifested in the most tangible way. A Welsh manor that now belongs to the boy she believed represented the future, not the stepfamily tethered to scandal and whispers. The property itself, a secluded, centuries-old estate nestled near the Brecon Beacons, had never been listed in any official Crown Estate register. Its very existence was a secret passed down through private channels, shielded from parliamentary eyes. Some say the Queen Mother spent time there during the war. Others claim it was her sanctuary, an untouched remnant of her Scottish-Welsh lineage that she vowed to protect from the hands of modernity and monarchy politics. But what stunned insiders wasn't just the reappearance of the property, it was the strategy behind its assignment. While many assumed this was merely a dormant title, the Queen Mother had kept it alive in silence, waiting, planning. And though the document was legally binding, it still needed royal acknowledgement to be enacted. That's where the internal divide began to show. Princess Anne and Prince Edward reportedly backed the move without hesitation, citing the importance of respecting their mother's final wishes. But it wasn't until Catherine stepped in, leveraging quiet influence and personal conviction, that the codicil was given full authority. Her role, though not loudly proclaimed, was undeniable. It was her persistence, gentle yet unwavering, that ensured the estate would land where it was always meant to. For Catherine, this wasn't just about heritage, it was about narrative, about reclaiming control from those who had chipped away at her family's place in the royal order. But if the Queen Mother's will was the spark, it was Princess Catherine's quiet determination that turned it into fire. While others vied for titles and visibility, Catherine operated in silence. Behind palace walls, she crafted a legacy plan not for herself, but for her children. Her handprints are all over this decision, insiders say. And this was not a passive inheritance. This was a bold move against the very faction that once tried to dim her light. For years, Catherine's connection to Welsh culture went far deeper than public appearances and polite engagements. While others treated regional duties as ceremonial obligations, she immersed herself in the soul of the nation, its language, its people, its memory of the Queen Mother. Those close to her recall her fascination with the late matriarch's personal writings, her unwavering interest in Wales's historical role in shaping the monarchy's public face. It wasn't coincidence. It was groundwork. Every charity, patronage, every visit to rural communities, every whispered conversation with historians, these were brushstrokes in a masterpiece she'd been painting in silence. And now, with the inheritance of the Queen Mother's estate falling into Prince Louis's hands, her strategy had come full circle. Months before the announcement sent shockwaves through the palace, Catherine had reportedly held discreet conversations with Crown Estate advisors, off-the-record briefings designed to understand the legal, historical, and emotional stakes involved. She wanted no mistakes, no loopholes, no room for reversal. It was never about the land. It was about the legacy attached to it, about ensuring her children stood not just in the spotlight of the future, but in the roots of the past. Unlike others who chased influence by proximity, Catherine built it through patience and precision. And in doing so, she avoided one crucial mistake: she never courted Camilla's camp. The tension between Catherine and Camilla's extended family had never been a headline, but it had always been there, palpable in their absence from each other's private circles, evident in the cool diplomacy of their public interactions. Catherine, deliberately or not, maintained a quiet yet unyielding distance, and with this inheritance, that distance transformed into a wall, a line drawn in royal stone. Insiders claim the announcement was both a personal victory and a political message. The House of Wales was rising, and it would no longer share the stage with those who had entered the monarchy through back doors of scandal and second chances. Behind closed doors, however, the emotion was real. Staff members speak of a moment when Catherine received final confirmation of the estate's transfer. She reportedly stood still for several minutes before excusing herself quietly. Later, a senior aide found her in tears, not of sadness, but of release, of triumph, of quiet vindication after years of being subtly undermined. This wasn't just a win for her son, it was the reclaiming of her own narrative. For so long, she had been seen as dutiful, composed, supportive. But now, whispers began to shift. In hushed tones across palace corridors, aides and advisors began referring to her as the Kingmaker. Not because she wore a crown, but because she shaped the world in which future crowns would rest. And while Catherine played her cards quietly, Camilla's camp erupted with fury, and what followed was anything but quiet. They thought they were untouchable. For years, Camilla's relatives enjoyed rising influence from prestigious roles to private invitations. But with this sudden inheritance, the unspoken truth became undeniable. They were never meant to be part of the monarchy's true future. Now, their rage is boiling over, and it's turning dangerously personal. The walls of privilege that once surrounded Camilla's family have begun to crack, and with the naming of Prince Louis as the heir to the Queen Mother's Welsh estate, the fracture became public. Camilla's children, who had long operated within the grey zone of royal influence, believed right up until the final hour that some token of legacy would be offered to them. Not necessarily for themselves, but for their children. A symbolic piece of land, a title, even a ceremonial role connected to the Queen Mother's past. But nothing came. Not a word. Not a courtesy call. Just a headline, and silence from the palace. Multiple sources confirm that Camilla's children initiated tense exchanges with senior palace aides shortly after the announcement. One particularly sharp confrontation was said to involve accusations of betrayal and warnings that their public loyalty had limits. Camilla, reportedly blindsided by the speed of the confirmation, is said to have requested a private meeting with King Charles to express her concerns, perhaps even plead for reconsideration. But insiders say she was shut down swiftly and firmly. Charles, worn by the strain of internal divisions and reportedly still reeling from the legal finality of the deed, offered no room for negotiation. It was done. And perhaps even worse, it had never been up for debate in the first place. Adding fuel to the fire were revelations that one of Camilla's granddaughters had once visited the estate during a private family retreat. At the time, there were whispers that the visit was symbolic, an early gesture that the property might someday be tied to her name. That illusion, now shattered, has been described by a family confidant as a personal humiliation for Camilla's side. Feelings of betrayal have given way to resentment, and palace staff have reportedly overheard veiled threats from certain corners of Camilla's circle about withdrawing cooperation from duties they had informally taken on since her elevation to Queen Consort. What was once a soft power alliance is beginning to fray. And yet, through it all, Camilla has remained outwardly composed. She continues to carry out her appearances with her usual poise, but those closest to her see what the cameras don't. Behind closed doors, she is described as deeply hurt not just by the inheritance itself, but by who orchestrated it. More than once, her private frustrations have allegedly turned toward Catherine, whom she now sees as the quiet architect of her family's exclusion. To Camilla, this wasn't just an estate, it was a signal, a message that her chapter in the monarchy's future was already being written in fading ink. Yet amidst all the shouting and storming, another quiet figure began moving behind the scenes, one who remembers loyalty above all. When royal tempers flare, one figure often steps into the shadows to broker peace or assert control. Princess Anne, the palace's quiet sentinel, made an unexpected move to ensure Louis's inheritance remained unchallenged. But was it just protection, or a deeper statement about who truly belongs at the crown's side? As Camilla's family raged behind the scenes and Charles recoiled under pressure from all directions, it was Princess Anne who walked calmly through the fire. Known for her no-nonsense demeanour and ironclad loyalty to the institution, she had stayed largely silent during the earliest murmurs of inheritance debates. But when the noise grew too loud to ignore, she didn't hesitate. Within hours of Camilla's emotional confrontation with the king, Anne requested a private audience, just the two of them. No aides, no advisors. What was said behind those doors has never been officially recorded, but multiple insiders confirmed that her tone was firm, unwavering. She told Charles the Queen Mother's intentions were not suggestions, they were sacred, and they were final. Anne, ever the guardian of tradition, allegedly made one point crystal clear. The crown could not afford to bend to modern entitlements. Not now. Not after everything. To entertain the idea of redrawing legacy lines to appease Camilla's family would be more than weakness, it would be betrayal. She reminded Charles that the monarchy was built on duty, not desire, legacy, not leverage. The Queen Mother, who had outmaneuvered crises that would have shattered weaker institutions, had left behind this decision not as a footnote but as a final act of design. To rewrite it now would mean unraveling the very principles they had all sworn to uphold. Whatever Anne said in that room, it worked. Palace staff, who had been cautiously organizing quiet support to review the inheritance, were told to stand down. The whispers stopped. The paperwork stayed sealed. And just like that, the noise that had been gathering around Camilla's circle began to wither in silence. But Anne's move wasn't just about strategy. It was personal. Unconfirmed reports suggest that days before the public confirmation, Anne made a solitary visit to the Welsh estate. No royal entourage. No announcement. Just a single vehicle seen arriving and leaving after several hours. Some say she walked the grounds. Others believe she entered the manor to reflect. But what's certain is this. When she returned to London, her resolve was set. And Catherine noticed. Though they had never been the most publicly aligned royals, a quiet understanding passed between them during a closed council briefing days later. A simple nod, a subtle glance. After years of mutual respect forged in duty and distance, Anne and Catherine stood aligned at a pivotal moment in royal history. The past was no longer just being protected, it was being weaponized to shape the future. Together, without ever raising their voices, they extinguished a rebellion before it could truly begin. But Anne wasn't the only one revisiting old loyalties, because deep within the archives, a document long thought destroyed emerged with devastating consequences. Buried under decades of dust, a royal deed surfaced containing a clause so specific it shocked even the king. It didn't just confirm the inheritance. It named who must never hold the estate. The language was unmistakable. And suddenly, the decision wasn't just emotional. The discovery came not from a ceremonial chest or golden vault, but from a forgotten ledger in a rarely accessed wing of the royal archives. The document, long dismissed as a duplicate of property transfers, turned out to be something far more explosive, a deed drafted in 1947, shortly after the Queen Mother acquired the Welsh estate in secret. At first glance, it detailed standard transfer language, but hidden deep within its final pages was a clause so precise, so absolute, it brought every debate within the palace to a grinding halt. The Queen Mother, in her own hand, had etched a line into royal history: the estate must remain within direct heirs of sovereign lineage. There was no ambiguity, no loophole, and no mercy. The phrasing went even further, explicitly excluding step relations, remarried lines, and any descendants not of singular regal descent. A choice of words chilling in its clarity. It was a wall erected not in anger, but in cold, deliberate design, meant to protect the legacy of royal blood from dilution. Suddenly, every protest, every plea from Camilla's side, every whispered suggestion of a re-evaluation was rendered obsolete. The Queen Mother hadn't merely willed the property to Louis. She had barred anyone outside the sovereign's direct line from ever laying claim to it. It wasn't preference. It was protection of heritage, of hierarchy, of the Windsor name. When the document was brought to King Charles, sources say he read it twice. Then again, the colour reportedly drained from his face. He was said to have whispered, "There's nothing I can do now." And he was right. Palace lawyers reviewed the clause immediately. Their verdict was swift and brutal. The deed was ironclad. To challenge it would require not just royal objection but an act of parliament, and even then, it would trigger a constitutional quagmire the monarchy could not afford. It was a line etched in law as much as in legacy. Camilla's relatives, desperate to regain footing, sought a legal review through independent counsel. They hoped to argue that the clause was outdated, perhaps discriminatory by modern standards. But the palace's response was unequivocal. The law protects the Queen Mother's wishes. The estate is not public land. It is sovereign inheritance tied not to modern expectations, but to ancestral will. Their challenge died in the same silence in which it began. And with that, the final pillar of hope for Camilla's camp collapsed, not with fanfare, but with paper and ink binding, immovable, eternal. The Welsh estate was no longer a gift, it was a fortress, a symbol, a weapon of legacy used with precision by a matriarch who, even in death, refused to let the future be rewritten by those she never truly accepted. Now cornered by history and law, Camilla turned to the only power she had left: emotional leverage. Sources say she requested a private audience with Charles, no aides, no records. What was said behind those doors remains unconfirmed, but afterward, Charles emerged visibly shaken. Some say she begged, others claim she threatened. But one thing is clear: Camilla fought not just for land, but for dignity. It was the kind of meeting that should never have needed to happen. Camilla, once elevated against all odds to Queen Consort, was never meant to plead for inclusion. But the events surrounding the Welsh estate had reduced even her position to a fragile question mark. With the Queen Mother's deed surfacing and legal avenues closing fast, Camilla made one final move, not as a royal, but as a woman watching the walls close in on everything she had built. The plea was emotional, raw, and according to those familiar with the situation, utterly desperate. She entered the king's private study with a letter in her hand and a fire behind her eyes. The tone, though calm at first, broke into anguish. At one point, she reportedly cried, "You let them erase my family," her voice cracking under the weight of betrayal. Charles's reaction is shrouded in silence. What is known is that 2 royal briefings were cancelled within hours of their meeting, without explanation. The king, usually able to compartmentalize even the gravest personal matters, was described by palace aides as visibly distracted and deeply troubled. One staffer claimed he spent the rest of the evening alone in his residence, doors locked, phone off, entirely unreachable. Whether it was guilt or exhaustion, nobody could say. But something in that meeting shook him. Not enough to reverse the decision, but enough to leave a lasting shadow. The ripple effects were immediate. Catherine, a permanent fixture at high-level strategic meetings, was conspicuously absent from the next royal council gathering. The omission was subtle, almost deniable, but it didn't go unnoticed. Whispers began to swirl that the Queen Consort had demanded a pause, a moment to breathe, a space free from what she saw as her greatest rival. The tension between the 2 women, always masked in civility, had hardened into something undeniable. Camilla was losing ground, and she knew exactly who had built the battlefield beneath her feet. In the days that followed, insiders claim Camilla began drafting a private statement, a personal reflection on legacy, unity, and the invisible pain of being sidelined. It was never released. Whether it was pulled back by advisors or abandoned by Camilla herself remains unclear. But the intent lingered, echoing in palace corridors like a secret too heavy to say aloud. This wasn't just a political loss, it was a personal one, and though her plea to Charles had failed to alter the future, it succeeded in exposing a deeper truth. Camilla had always been battling not just for her place in the family, but for the right to matter. But while Camilla mourned a loss of status, the youngest royal unknowingly stepped into history. At only 8 years old, Prince Louis has become the lightning rod for a royal reckoning. He knows nothing of the storm around him, yet his name is now tied to a legacy far greater than a piece of land. It is a symbol, a turning point, and perhaps the start of a very different monarchy. He didn't ask for the weight of history. He didn't seek to inherit a controversy. And yet, Prince Louis has become the unexpected centerpiece in a drama that stretches generations deep. The youngest son of Prince William and Princess Catherine now stands as the custodian of a legacy that deliberately excludes the old guard. His inheritance of the Queen Mother's Welsh estate wasn't just a private transfer, it was a public signal. A declaration that the future of the monarchy will be written not by those who clawed their way in from the periphery, but by those born at its very heart. While he plays in royal gardens and poses innocently for birthday portraits, his name echoes across political roundtables, media broadcasts, and strained family dinners. And all the while, he remains blissfully unaware that he has become the figure around whom the next royal chapter is quietly being drafted. The press wasted no time in shaping his image, the young custodian of Welsh tradition, some headlines declared. Editorials praised the symbolism of passing heritage to a child untouched by scandal, free from the baggage of palace politics. Others questioned whether placing such symbolic weight on a boy so young was reckless or brilliant. But among the public, the response has been resoundingly clear. They see in Louis a return to lineage, to blood-bound duty, and to the clarity that many feel the monarchy has lost in recent years. The ambiguity surrounding Camilla's family and the constant tug-of-war over titles and legitimacy has exhausted the public. Louis's inheritance, by contrast, feels pure, restorative, intentional. Within palace walls, Catherine has already begun laying the foundation. Those close to her say she is focused not on headlines, but on legacy. Determined to instill in Louis not just royal responsibility, but cultural understanding, he will grow up with an intimate knowledge of the estate, its history, and what it means to a monarchy that once stood on the edge of uncertainty. A commemorative plaque is reportedly being installed at the estate, engraved not just with his name, but with the Queen Mother's own words about continuity and duty. It is a fusion of past and future, of old world honor and modern identity, and at the center of it stands a child who, unknowingly, now represents everything the crown is trying to become. Behind the scenes, analysts are calling this moment a quiet revolution, not loud, not televised, but undeniable. A shift away from extended branches, away from the performative unity of blended royal households. The focus is narrowing, consolidating. The House of Wales, once one of many competing forces, is beginning to look like the foundation, and Prince Louis, its youngest voice, is already shaping the silence. But as the dust settles over this explosive inheritance, one question still hangs in the air. What does this mean for the future of the crown itself? The lines have been drawn, and the monarchy stands at a crossroads. With Prince Louis's inheritance triggering deep family fractures, the House of Windsor may never operate the same again. Is this a strategic realignment of royal priorities, or the quiet start of a rebellion against the old guard? Behind the dignified smiles and choreographed photo ops, a new structure is emerging, one not officially declared, but undeniably in motion. The days of blended alliances and extended step-relatives quietly influencing royal affairs appear to be fading. In their place, a laser-sharp focus on direct bloodline is taking shape. This shift hasn't been shouted from the palace balcony, it's been whispered in deeds, decisions, and silences. And Louis's inheritance was the clearest whisper yet. What was once an accepted but unspoken rule is now visibly etched into the framework of the future. Legitimacy matters, and not all who marry into royalty will be granted equal place at the table. King Charles, already burdened with navigating a delicate transition between generations, now finds his role increasingly compromised by personal entanglements. His efforts to balance duty with affection have become harder to sustain. The more he tries to accommodate both his wife's family and the constitutional integrity of the monarchy, the more those two forces seem destined to collide. And in the eyes of many, they already have. Public sentiment has grown colder toward Camilla's family, viewing them not as victims of royal hierarchy, but as beneficiaries of privilege not earned through tradition. The people have made a quiet judgment, and it leans heavily in favor of William and Catherine's children as the rightful stewards of the future. Now, Attention turns to what comes next. Will George, Charlotte, and Louis each receive distinct pieces of the monarchy's legacy, tailored not by equality but by intention? Will future estates, patronages, and responsibilities continue this pattern of bloodline consolidation? Royal watchers are already speculating that Catherine's influence is no longer soft or silent but structural, strategic, irreversible. Her ability to shape not just perception but direction has made her the most quietly powerful figure in the firm. While others play for position, she's been reshaping the board entirely. And so, the British monarchy moves forward not with a grand declaration, but with a subtle yet undeniable shift. A pivot from accommodation to consolidation. From inclusivity to bloodline clarity. From the old model of coexistence to something far more concentrated. And it all began with one decision, one signature, one child whose name now lives in history, one inheritance, one child, and a crown that may never sit the same way again. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.